Well, I'm excited today that we'll be continuing our part two discussion with Mr. Jim Lakely, the Vice President of the Heartland Institute and a longtime analyst from the United States. We're going to be talking about a lot of issues today, from the upcoming United States election on November, as well as climate models and whether or not we are in fact in a climate crisis, as well as issues related to censorship, all issues that matter to us and certainly our American neighbors.
A clear path forward requires looking back and learning. Good public policy requires human connection. It's a consideration of the facts, applying common sense and innovation. It's urban, it's rural, it's real life. We all have something to contribute. We all have a responsibility to get informed, because there's a little piece of Canada in all of us, isn't there? Let's learn on this path together. This is Leaders on the Frontier.
So another issue that I do want to get at, and I know that Heartland has done an awful lot of research on this issue, has to do with the concerns regarding the 2020 election. In Canada, the assumption is that people who talk about the idea that the 2020 election was stolen are conspiracy theorists. And I think that does a disservice to the very real evidence and incredible work that's been done by many organizations and people, including yourselves. But help us understand what happened during the 2020 election. And I should just note that I believe, if memory serves me correctly, there's poll after poll that shows well over half the American population believes that the 2020 election was compromised, if not stolen. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've seen polling to that regard as well. So count me among those who are so-called election deniers and conspiracy theorists, because I've covered politics for a big chunk of my professional life as a journalist. And I've voted in every election since 1988. And I've never seen an election night or election procedures like I saw in 2020. I never saw the media prime us by saying there could be a red wave on election night, but hold on, there's going to be a blue tide coming in after that. They were priming us like, oh, we have to wait till we count all of the votes, and it could take weeks. We may not know who the president is for weeks.
No kidding.
That was never the standard in the United States. Suddenly it's the new standard. Suddenly in 2020, because of COVID, because it's too dangerous to go to your polling place. It's not too dangerous to go to Walmart. It's not too dangerous to go to the grocery store, but it's too dangerous to vote. So we have to mail everybody, dead, alive, pets, imaginary friends. Everybody gets a ballot, and we'll throw out, like they did in Pennsylvania, my former home state. They just threw out the election rules completely and made them up on the fly. That all happened to just make the ballots a lot less secure and open for fraud. And yet we're gaslit, told by our media and told by our own government that the 2020 election was the most secure election in American history. If you want to know why, there's a lot of Americans like me that get a little angry sometimes thinking about their country and thinking about this upcoming election. It's the gaslighting. It's the lies. It's being told by officialdom and the ruling class that, no, Jim, you're wrong. You didn't see trucks show up in the middle of the night at a counting house in Detroit. You didn't see footage of people stuffing ballot drop boxes with bins full of ballots. You didn't see that on tape. That didn't actually happen. You didn't see any of these things. It was the most secure election in American history. And if you don't mouth those words publicly, then you are a conspiracy theorist. You actually, in the words of our own president, President Biden, are a danger to democracy. Some of the January 6th people that stormed the Capitol in a 4-hour riot, part of their sentencing is they had to state publicly in court that they thought they had to state it publicly. The 2020 election was legitimate and Joe Biden is my legitimate president. That's Maoist. Yes, that happened, David. That's Maoist China stuff. And it was happening in the United States. And so, yes, to me, you add all of that kind of stuff up, and I am with those half of Americans who do not believe that the 2020 election was entirely on the up and up.
Okay, But what I find fascinating about this whole debate then, Jim, is that if I were elected, and I have been an elected official, but if I were elected, I would have, and there was that kind of divide in terms of opinion, like over half your population thinks that you're illegitimate. Why wouldn't you work in every way possible to lay everything out in a transparent way and actually get to the bottom of it and address these concerns? Instead, it's all about how dare you question, and will either censor you or will fine you or intimidate you or harass you, instead of addressing the real valid concerns and questions.
It could be, David, that there are no legitimate answers to those very legitimate questions. And so you call everybody who questions you and asks you very difficult questions that do not have straight answers a conspiracy theorist. You otherize them. I mean, your listeners can look up, the so-called red speech by Biden. I think it was about a year ago when he was still, he's standing there, two Marines behind him, the columns awash in red. It was like something out of a dystopian movie. And he was accusing half of the United States of being, I think he at least softened it by saying semi-fascist because they support Donald Trump or they don't support him. I mean, some of the things that I've seen happen in this country, again, everything seemed to be on fast forward because the third Obama term had a 4-year interregnum thanks to Donald Trump. There's things I hear from our president and our ruling class that I never would have thought I would hear in the United States of America. And so maybe you're not getting good answers to those very legitimate and should be easily answered questions about the 2020 election is because there are no legitimate good answers. Because that's the only conclusion I can have when they don't even make any good faith efforts, like you said, to assuage the fears that Americans have that our election system is broken, if not utterly corrupt.
Yeah, and I think I find this very disconcerting, that kind of tone and rhetoric. I do recall Biden's so-called red speech very well. It's very ominous because it's almost like vilifying and demonizing fellow citizens. And that is not appropriate within free and democratic societies. And we saw that certainly in Canada when we had a prime minister that didn't even refuse to meet with the truckers who were in peaceful protest and just demonized them even before they rolled into town, didn't even meet with them. But then invoked the Emergency Measures Act, which has been, of course, declared now as unconstitutional. But this is
a little late for the truckers, though, isn't it? It's a little late for the truckers. This is something that the ruling class does. They know what they're doing is illegal, if not immoral, and they do it anyway because they know their intent will already have effect before they're corrected gently later on. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, it's so disingenuous. It's really quite Machiavellian, if I can use that term. So in this context, Jim, what were the key facts from your findings, your analysis? You had a team look at the election. What were the key facts that would give us pause to say, well, maybe that election was stolen?
Yeah. Well, in 2020, we partnered with Rasmussen. And for a long time, for a couple months, actually, we kicked around the idea because we do polls from time to time with Rasmussen. And they tend to like our questions because we ask some pretty interesting questions that, frankly, somebody who's in the professional polling business may not have thought of. And we were kicking around for a while the idea, is it possible to craft a poll that would gauge any level of election fraud or illegal voting? Let's put it that way, illegal voting in the 2020 election. And so we decided, well, what if we asked if voters, one, voted in the 2020 election, two, did this act and this act and this act with their ballot, and ask them to just admit that we won't say that those are actually illegal. These actions are illegal. We'll just ask if they did that or if they knew somebody who did that. And so we did. And so we sent the poll out with Rasmussen. And frankly, I was nervous only because I thought, this maybe it's just going to be a dud. We'll pay Rasmussen to do this poll, and we won't get very much return on investment because surely people are not going to admit to committing voter fraud, are they? We found actually quite the opposite. And Rasmussen has been doing polling for a long, long time, and they were shocked at the results. And so when we got it back, 21%. So we polled 1,085 people. Or Rasmussen polled 1,085 people with our questions, with a completely accurate demographic breakdown of the 2020 election as far as men and women, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, blacks, Hispanics, whites, geographic areas. They've been doing this for a long time. They know how to do that and to get a representative sample of voters in the United States. And what they found was that 21% of the people polled said that they voted in a state where they were, quote, no longer a permanent resident. That's illegal.
Can you
You're
repeat
not supposed to do that. Yes, 21%.
21%.
21% said they voted in a state in which they are no longer a permanent resident. In almost every circumstance, that's voter fraud. That's illegal. That vote should be thrown out. Obviously, this goes without saying, every illegal vote cast should be thrown out and not counted in the election. 21% in the survey admitted that they filled out a ballot for a friend or family member. Now, that may have been innocently done, but in most states, almost all of them, that's illegal. Yeah. You're not allowed to do that. 17% said they signed a ballot for a friend or family member, quote, with or without his or her permission. It is a felony to sign a ballot that is with that is not yours. The intent, and then you add into this, as I mentioned before, because of COVID, we have to throw out all the regular election rules, mail everybody a ballot, and then basically let Democratic operatives scour the country and bring them all in. And that's why we were told by our media, the election's not over. It could be not over for a few weeks while they count up all of these ballots. So when you add all of that in, this poll that we released in December, it really made big news, and it's still making news today. And it shows that the 2020 election was very far from the most secure election in American history. And it could never have been the most secure election in American history when millions upon millions upon millions of ballots were mailed out all across America with no regulations, no signature verification in almost every case. So we just did the poll, and people admitted that they basically committed one of 5 different versions of voter fraud.
Yeah. Well, it all strikes me as a former elected official is almost like, no offense to banana republics, but like a banana republic, because we should be able to count our elections within the day that votes are cast. We shouldn't have electoral weeks or months or seasons. They should be pretty straight up, notwithstanding a legitimate absentee ballots. But this whole mail-in business is just strange because you can't have proper ID. I mean, the gate is totally wide open to fraud, and I think even if you don't believe that there was specific fraud undertaken, the enormous amount of the public in the United States, namely half of them, don't believe it was legitimate. That is a problem in a democratic society, because if people don't believe an election is legitimate, they will distrust everything that you're doing, and they will believe that they may have to take alternative measures, even violence, if they believe their backs up against the wall. Is this not? This is a very important issue, Jim.
It's the most important. I think election integrity is the most important issue in both of our countries right now. One of the reasons people, again, I want to believe that my country and my government is legitimate and that they're looking out for the betterment of we the people. I want to believe that, but I keep seeing in front of me evidence that I don't live in that world, or to think that way is to live in a fantasy world and not the real world that we live in today. I mean, the state of Florida had a ton of mail-in ballots, just like every other state. They are the 3rd most populous state in the country, I believe, after California and Texas. They had their entire election counted up that night or the next morning. Mm-hmm. Isn't it weird how the only states that took weeks upon weeks upon weeks to count up all their ballots were just the swing states that were needed to decide the election in favor of Joe Biden? Now, that is a question that I have been raising for 4 years, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I want a good answer for it. I want a better answer than, well, that's just how long it took. that is not a good enough answer. Not in a country in which it's very, very important for the people to have trust in their election systems, because every single fake ballot that is counted that should not have been counted, every fraudulent ballot, every illegal ballot that is counted, takes away your franchise. Not, the franchise from some guy somewhere. You, the American people, should be thinking, as I do, that every one of those takes it away from me. My franchise, my birthright, my liberty is under threat every time our elections are run like complete circuses. It's a joke. And, I've said on another podcast, it's a very sad state of affairs that in Iraq, post-war Iraq, where you would dip your finger in the purple ink and put your finger up to the camera, that post-war Iraq runs better and more secure elections than the United States of America in 2024. Wow. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. And it's also, as you said, David, dangerous, because when people do not believe that, when they believe that they are ruled and they are not, as opposed to being represented in their government, that they are not free people, that they are subjects, we're right back to where we were 248 years ago, because that's dangerous. Those were dangerous times then and would be very dangerous times here in the United States or Canada today.
Yeah, well said. I think you're absolutely right, Jim. So if I had to switch gears then a little bit to areas of policy, and we mentioned about climate change, or the invocation that somehow there's a climate crisis, a la Greta Thunberg with her finger waving at us saying the world's going to end. Is there another game going on, Jim, as well? Like, we know that the scientific models, even proposed by the UN panels, are really looking at 1 degree over some 80 years. I mean, it's almost bizarre, the kind of modeling problems, and you know them better than I do, Jim. But in that context, do we also have a cynical game being played by, what's the term, rent-seeking billionaires? I think of, like, there's all the quote alternative energy is all a subsidy game, subsidy game to get money from the government, like windmills, solar panels, and all the rest. And we know that they're all based on, quote, fossil fuels anyways. They're not reliable. When the wind doesn't flow, you have a problem. They're intermittent. There's enormous issues. So is there another game going on here where people are making a lot of money when they know, well, that this is not the long-term solution to our energy needs?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, what's the kryptonite to the ruling elite, and not just the political ruling elite, but the corporate ruling elite? It is a free, prosperous, happy people. And cheap energy, as we've always had it known, is a key component to having a free, prosperous, and happy people. And so now we are artificially increasing the cost of energy, because it makes it easier to control people that way. If you control energy, you control everything, literally everything. So energy is the number one avenue to control. And so how do you justify controlling and fundamentally transforming, to use a phrase, our energy system around in the United States, Canada, and around the world? You do that by telling people that if we don't immediately and radically change the way we produce energy, away from coal, natural gas, basically fossil fuels, but primarily coal, natural gas, and nuclear energy, of course, which isn't a fossil fuel. The only way we can save the planet is to transfer away from that and into all of these, as you mentioned, the solar, the wind, which is unreliable, which is expensive. But if we don't do that, the world's going to end, or we're going to ruin the planet. So we must do it, and we must do it now. We must do it now. There's always this sense of urgency. So one of the things the Heartland Institute works on, and why we're known globally as the number one think tank around the world pushing back on climate alarmism, is because we work with some of the world's most prominent scientists who have looked at the data and say human activity is not causing a climate crisis. And it is getting warmer, sure, but it's fine that it's getting warmer. And humans are actually not the ones driving it. There are all sorts of other factors that are driving this in here. So they're driving climate change, because the climate is always changing. And so the idea, so we are always attacked by the ruling class and by the elites and by the left, because we are punching holes in the scientific, quote unquote, scientific justification for completely transforming our energy system.
Okay,
because
so there isn't a consensus on Greta Thunberg's thesis that we're all careening to an end?
There's a consensus among, I'm going to say it. There's a consensus among bought and paid for sock puppets for the elites who call themselves scientists.
Wow.
There is a lot. You can make a career and a good bit of money by going along with the climate scare. You don't make any money or get any prestige by going against the climate scare.
Okay, but to be clear then, so you don't think carbon dioxide is a pollutant?
It's absolutely not a pollutant. The pollutants are scrubbed out of it before it gets emitted into the air. That's like, the whole California air standards, for instance. Every car in the United States has to adhere to California's very clean tailpipe emission standards. Okay, fine, we'll do that. And yet you still call it a pollutant. But CO2 is the gas of life. It is not a pollutant.
Okay, but in the meantime, Jim, shouldn't we just all sign up for electric vehicles that are subsidized by the state and just drive electric vehicles, and we'll be all okay? We don't have to worry about it.
You keep triggering me here, David. You're going to get me mad now. You're in all of my topics that get me upset.
Okay.
No, electric vehicles. I mean, that's a whole scam on its own. I mean, actually, I just saw this morning, Apple, as I mentioned earlier, the most capitalized company in the history of human civilization, announced today that they're giving up on their dream of making an electric vehicle.
Oh, is that right? Even Apple?
Yes, just today.
Okay, because last week it was Mercedes that is changing its whole lineup away from EVs. And how are those electric vehicles, the Ford F-150 selling, Jim?
Not well. They are not well. They're not selling very well. In fact, I've only been in a couple of electric vehicles, and one of them was a Tesla, and it is a neat little piece of technology. I don't even consider it a car. I consider it a piece of technology. It's like a very expensive toy to me because it doesn't feel like an actual vehicle. It doesn't feel like a car. I'm old-fashioned that way. But Elon Musk actually hasn't really made his fortune on making Teslas, making electric vehicles. He makes his fortune by selling credits to other companies that don't make electric vehicles. And so the bad news is that as the electric vehicle market and the mandates start to dissolve or collapse under the weight of their own absurdity, that's going to cost Elon Musk some money one day. But he's a trillionaire; he can handle it. Just keep going to space. I'll be happy. And own Twitter. Let us speak freely. I'll give him two big kudos for that.
Exactly. Well, another issue I'd like to reflect on with you, Jim, because we're covering a lot of ground here, has to do with the whole concerns around censorship. We know that in the United States, you have the Second Amendment. In Canada, we have a long history going back some 1,000 years regarding the importance of freedom of speech. That's foundational for any, I would argue, not just democracy, but a prosperous economy, as we need innovation and we need to be able to have healthy debate to be able to move our economy forward. And I think the last, it's hard, it's gone so quickly here, but the last year has really been quite a revelation as Elon Musk acquired formerly Twitter, and he finds all these really, frankly, in my opinion, criminal documents showing the fingerprints of U.S. agencies all over censorship on every issue. I mean, it just goes from bad to worse. Like there's just a rolling set of revelations coming forward. And it certainly matters to us as Canadians, as so much of our news, including the rest of the world, comes from these massive social media companies where governments, U.S. governments, were threatening to take away their licensing, putting on massive multi-billion-dollar penalties on them if they didn't narrate certain opinions regarding COVID-19, to what is it again? Oh, climate alarmism, to all kinds of topics. So is that a situation that is seeping now into the consciousness of the minds of Americans, Jim? Are they realizing that, wow, we've got a serious information problem when the government is pushing censorship everywhere it can?
Yes. And let me correct you real quick. You said the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is our right to bear arms, to have guns, which I know you Canadians are not big fans of either.
The First Amendment. Sorry.
Yeah.
The First Amendment.
That's okay. Yeah, that's fine. You're failing your citizenship test here, David.
Apologies.
I'm going to have to recommend you're not allowed to come in the country now. So that's yeah. I mean the First Amendment. One of the reasons despite basically running Tesla, Tesla's fine, but all stuff. But Elon Musk, he's now public enemy number one in the United States because
Elon Musk is.
Yeah, he's enemy number one.
Wait a sec. Right now. I thought he was a hero, Jim. He's producing electric vehicles. He's doing the SpaceX like you wouldn't believe. He's doing all kinds of initiatives on, every area of technology. It's really astounding. I thought he was a hero.
Nope. The deep state has been weaponized against him. He probably has 4 different government investigations against him and his companies at the moment. And it's because he bought Twitter. And he bought it because he says that he, as a naturalized American citizen, he's originally from South Africa, that Canada. He is a free speech absolutist. And that makes him a radical and dangerous person in this country.
Oh, my.
Whereas, where not that long ago, and I was a journalist by training. The First Amendment is very important to journalism. It's actually important,
indeed,
but it's important to everybody. It's not just journalists who enjoy First Amendment protections. It's citizens and everybody else too. But you used to not have to call yourself a free speech absolutist. It was taken as a given, as an American, that you believe in free speech. And the First Amendment only exists to protect speech that people don't like. You don't need a First Amendment to protect speech that goes along with the herd and that everybody would agree with. That's not why the First Amendment exists at all. And so, we now live in a society, and this, goes into the education, or I should say indoctrination, of Gen Z and millennials in this country. I'm Generation X. That's probably why I'm so cynical. But we may have been the last generation to get a pretty, decent public education in the United States. Because if you look at polling, younger people today, millennials and Gen Z, they don't put any value at all in the First Amendment. They think that if you say something that offends someone, you shouldn't be allowed to say it, and probably should be subject to punishment for it.
Wow.
So and then you put that aside for a moment and get back to what you were talking about before. The First Amendment prevents the government from censoring Americans. And our government in the United States has been violating that principle ever since they got Donald Trump out of office. And, they've done that through intermediaries, which is our media companies, but especially our social media companies, by banning speech that the regime does not approve of.
Oh.
Specifically and explicitly, and through meetings. The Twitter files that Elon Musk released after he bought Twitter, and he did this independently through real journalists. He gave them the data, gave them the information, and let them write about it and release that information to the world, showed how the most important free speech platforms in the world were coordinating with government to suppress the speech of anybody who disagreed with government narratives, be it on COVID, be it on climate change, be it on, oh my gosh, the 2020 election, to the point where, even inconvenient news that is real and legitimate and true is suppressed because it would reflect poorly on Joe Biden. So when I talk about how it seems like things are falling apart and there's like Operation Chaos going on in the United States, this is all part of it, because it is an all fronts assault on the American ideals of self-governance, but especially of free speech. And that's why I think the 2024 election actually is really important, in that it may not actually change anything. I would hope it would, but maybe it doesn't change anything even for the long run. But at least it might slow down or stop this absolute breakneck speed of anti-Americanism that is happening right now. And maybe that little bit of breathing room will give enough people a chance to see what's going on and make sure that we stop going in that direction and have a restoration of the American ideals of liberty and freedom and free speech, and that your politics do not define you, and that disagreeing with somebody doesn't mean that they're evil These are things that we used to take for granted in the civilized West, us Americans and Canadians alike, but especially you polite Canadians. And we've really lost that in the United States. And I think we need to get it back. But the foundation of getting back to that is a proper respect and application of the First Amendment, which is for us, not for the government.
I think you're absolutely right, Jim. What a brilliant summation, and really the call for a renewal when it comes to those values and its application. And I did want to share a clip from you. I know that you're familiar with Laura Logan. She gave testimony just the other day in front of a kind of a rogue Senate committee by the great Senator Ron Johnston. And she talks about this information war.
We live in the age of information warfare, where propaganda is not simply a weapon, it is the entire field of battle. This is a war for our minds that is aided by advanced technology, and we have never been here, not in all of human history. It is a moment when we as journalists should stand together, united, and regardless of politics, we should fight for the truth and we should fight for freedom. Yet, not very long ago, we allowed one of our own, Tucker Carlson, to be branded as a traitor simply for doing his job. In fact, there were many so-called journalists who were leading the charge against Tucker, accusing him of treason for the simple fact of interviewing the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. And to my knowledge, there was not a single legacy media institution that spoke up. This was more than a politically motivated attack on one man. It was...
You said you've been targeted over the last 10 years. Can you describe what precipitated your targeting?
Yes, reporting the truth about Benghazi. I was attacked by one of those NGOs that masquerades as a nonpartisan watchdog. In violation of its 501(c) status, it occupies a highly partisan position. I'm talking about Media Matters for America. I'm sure there's many doctors in this room, scientists who've been attacked by the same people. The same people that run that, David Brock, for example, another political assassin, now runs an organization called Facts First USA, which is designed to make sure that your research, Dr. Hazan, never reaches the people or the public. There are other organizations like Defeat Disinfo, which claims to be a PAC that goes after disinformation, particularly set up to target COVID, and throughout COVID with General Stanley McChrystal and the other people that advise that organization. But what, Senator Johnson, it's not a secret that these organizations exist. What is not widely known and talked about is that it's paid for by us. It's paid for by the taxpayers in your omnibus spending bills that get shoved through the House and the Senate against the will of the people of this country. There are cutouts for these NGOs, and what they do is they launder this money, they pass it from one NGO to the next, and in the name of preventing the spread of disinformation, they censor, silence, intimidate, and punish. I said that this is a death sentence for journalists. It's how you murder a journalist without killing them. It's how you murder a scientist without killing them. It's how you murder a doctor without killing them. It's how you murder the vaccine injured when they haven't died yet. It's how you finish them off and everybody else in their family. And it's time for people in this building who come to work every day here, to serve us. This is the only country where we, the people, are the government. This is a government for the people, of the people, and by the people. And the same is said for so-called journalists.
So I think that's a very powerful clip, and I think it's an analysis that complements your own, Jim. You're a former journalist. You watch this very closely, what's going on. But I think what a revelation there is that Laura Logan identifies, as you did, the funding by parts of the administrative state of all these different proxies, these agencies. So you had this particular merger of the state directing these proxies to undertake the dirty work of censorship. Is that your analysis as well?
Yes, it is. And in fact, I believe case law in the United States makes no distinction between government imposing censorship or government partnering with a intermediary to enforce censorship. The point of it is that government is not permitted, and it's not even supposed to get within 1,000 miles of saying that people can't say what they want. And so, how they do this again is they funded these organizations, these so-called fact-checking organizations, as Laura Logan just mentioned there, of so-called misinformation and disinformation. How often have you, David, and your listeners been told a certain notion or opinion or even fact was misinformation or disinformation, only to learn, I don't know, 6-8 months, a year later, in fact, that was actually 100% correct. You can say that on any topic, from politics to the climate to to COVID and vaccines. And I'm going to keep saying all the words that will get this video demonetized, but I'm going to do it anyway because that's what free speech is about. And so what they do is they label something that the ruling elite, the regime, the government, whatever you want to say, any information that people might hear and, oh my gosh, might believe that runs counter to the plans of our ruling class has to be classified as mis or disinformation. And only they are the arbiters of those things. When in fact, it's like we are living in the upside down or in some kind of bizarro world where everything that is true is a lie, so-called true is a lie, and everything that was a lie is true. It's almost entirely the opposite, from this topic to that topic. I mean, what I mean by that is that the number one purveyor of actual disinformation and misinformation were the government agents, especially when it came to COVID. It was not people allowed to speak on their own about treatments or vaccine efficacy or the wisdom of shutting down schools. All of that kind of talk, just ordinary talk that people would do, suddenly became quasi illegal in this country. And as Laura Logan said, depends on what you do for a living, but being deplatformed and canceled can be a professional and even personal death sentence for a lot of people. But the ruling class has no problem ruining people's lives just for speaking their mind. And it used to be inconceivable that an American would consider that at all. I mean, I'm not that old. I wasn't an adult in the 1950s, but I do remember the 80s and 90s pretty well. And it used to be, we lived in a world where you could say what you want. Somebody could disagree. Yeah, that's fine. And move on with your life. It is very telling, I think, David, that the left and the ruling class and our media, all of these people that are coordinating together, and they're very well funded, they are scared to death to allow people to say what they want. They are scared to death with the notion that they might hear information that goes against their messaging. To me, and I like when I am occasionally optimistic about these kinds of topics, that tells me that they are going to lose in the end, because the truth will as they say, the truth will out. And, but they're acting like they are scared. And if they're scared, that's got to be good for our side, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, Jim, what you're saying is very powerful. It reminds me, especially now this week, where our federal government has introduced an online censorship bill that gets at different issues, including what is so-called hate speech. And this reminds me of the final chapter of the famous book by Friedrich Hayek, On the Road to Serfdom, where he talks about the death of truth, that this is a time where state authorities always weigh in and say, this is the official truth, a la 1984. And this is the time that we're at, is it not, Jim?
It is. I was remembering as you were saying that, David, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, another WEF acolyte. There's a clip out there you can find it on Twitter and YouTube, I'm sure, where she was absconding the public to only believe if the government says it, then you know it's the truth. And if you're hearing it from somebody else that's not the government, then that is not the truth. I mean, blatantly saying it out loud like that. And it also reminded me, I think it was Solzhenitsyn who said that, one of those Soviet dissidents, that it is a pretty big deal when the government tells lies. That's important, and you need to counter that. But they have real power when they can make you lie, and then make you believe those lies. That's where the real power comes in, making otherwise free people mouth those same lies. And we were, I think, pretty dangerously close to that, if not already there in the United States, especially when it came to COVID and other so-called, off the table topics that people were afraid to speak their minds, to the point where they were saying lies to their own families that, it's a good idea that we close the schools. It's not that big a deal that, Johnny was kept out of school and is now a grade and a half behind where he would have been. We'll manage. When you get to that point as a society, then you're in real trouble.
Indeed. Well, and I think there's another insidious angle to this, and that is, of course, the world of technology. If we look at the use of TikTok, which is clearly a driven device or platform owned by the Communist Party of China, that has significant implications on what a particular group, namely young millennials, see. I mean, there's other age categories as well. But that's well known that certainly after October 7, all of a sudden we saw particular messages being pressed that were very focused against Israeli positions and in favor of Hamas, of all things. But we also know that people spend a lot of time on their so-called smart devices, and this has a huge impact on the information that they see. So using our critical minds is more important than ever. And I think of the incredible pioneering work done by Dr. Robert Epstein around the Google algorithms and what one searches for and what actually comes up says everything we need to know when it comes to how these information technology platforms are utterly compromised for political purposes. Is that a fair comment, Jim?
Yeah, I would use the word corrupt. I think the word corrupt applies to so many of the power structures in our society, be it a private corporation power structure or a governmental power structure. Google is a mess. Google is ideologically captured. There are so many of our elite institutions in the United States, and I'm sure in Canada, sadly as well, that have been ideologically captured by the left, by the academic, radical, un-American, un-Canadian left in the United States, from Hollywood to academia, to our medical schools, to our psychological societies, to our media. Every powerful institution, an influential institution in the United States, is pushing a radical leftist agenda. I know that sounds crazy. I know it sounds, Jim, this is another conspiracy theory. But if you can name for me a powerful, influential institution in the United States that is not controlled, that is controlled by conservatives, for instance, I'd like to hear it. But most of them are controlled by radicals on the left, not liberal institutions, not just guys that are little hippies or they just think more freely and all that stuff.
Right.
Not those kind of liberals back from the 90s. And we're talking radical Marxists, leftists that control some of the biggest institutions in both of our countries, and that includes
I think
Google.
I think it's a very challenging question to answer. So we'll leave that with our audience. And see, in the meantime, then we're confronted with the question of lawfare. We have, which is the whole art and science, if you will, and it's been used for some time, but much more recently, as a way to use the law, to weaponize it, and to, in effect, put into prison your political opponent. Stalin, Mao, Hitler were all very adept at this. They were all leaders from the left, of course. People may not realize, but Nazis saw themselves as socialists. But in this context, they use lawfare to get rid of their political opponents. Is that exactly what is happening to Donald Trump, Orange Man bad, as they try to put him in prison for 900 years?
It is exactly what is happening. and it's a continuation of what's been happening to Donald Trump. Basically, since he came down the golden escalator at Trump Tower to announce his run for president. I mean,
Wow.
in fact, our podcast In the Tank tomorrow on the Stopping Socialism TV channel on YouTube is going to be going over hammer and tongs, the kind of the timeline and the extent to which the deep state and the government agencies have been weaponized against him, because
Wow.
he is frankly obviously considered an enemy of the state, because he was a
Dang.
complete outsider. That's the thing that really shocked the world. If you look back at, it makes me laugh. It really makes me smile. The sadness, and there were members of Biden's administration who were in the background crying in the Rose Garden after Donald Trump had won. I don't know. You'd have to have a heart of stone not to
Wow.
smile at that kind of thing. But
Okay,
But-
so this is something that you will almost never hear in the Canadian context.
Really?
So Donald Trump, you don't see these as legitimate charges. They're all, pardon the pun, trumped up charges. They're fake charges. They're twisting the law
yes,
to prosecute. They're not prosecuting. They're persecuting a former president because he represents obviously an existential threat. So why are they doing this? They're playing obviously for all the marbles. So what are all the marbles? Why would anyone go to this length to persecute someone?
I think because he is a danger to the entire structure. He's such a potential danger to the entire structure of power that frankly the ruling class and the ruling elites in the United States have spent decades establishing, cultivating, and making more powerful. I mean, the biggest power of the deep state was that nobody knew about it, that they were able to affect the lives of men without anybody knowing that they were there. And the election of Donald Trump exposed them for people to see. Now, I think part of it is there's just straight up Trump derangement syndrome. It just triggers some animalistic synapse goes off in their brain, and they can't think logically anymore because, oh my God, Donald Trump, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Hillary was supposed to win. It was going to be this great historic thing. They've just never gotten over that stuff. But it is very clear that the judicial system has been weaponized against Donald Trump and not others. And all you have to do is see if these laws that are being applied to Donald Trump have ever applied to anybody else. You can take the classified documents case, in which it's okay for Biden to have them in boxes next to his, in broken down boxes in his garage next to his beloved Corvette.
Wow.
In the same house that his meth smoking son was meeting with international business partners. That's fine. Hey, just give them back to us. We'll be cool. And we won't even mention that Joe Biden, as vice president, had no right to any classified documents ever in his entire life, ever. He was a senator and he was a vice president. He's not entitled to have personal possession of any classified documents. He should have been arrested just for that. You could at least make the argument that as a former president or president, Donald Trump is the only person who's allowed to have basically whatever classified documents he wants in his possession.
Right.
But then just one other case, the case in New York City, in which Donald Trump, I think he had to admit in court today that he frankly doesn't have the cash to pay $400 million just so he can appeal the BS decision that was just handed down to him by a kangaroo court in New York. He was charged with civil fraud, I suppose, because it wasn't criminal, but charged civilly for taking out loans with banks, paying them back with interest. There was nobody harmed by this supposed scheme to defraud banks. The banks actually testified, this is crazy. You shouldn't be doing this. We actually made money on the deal. This is fine. They fined him $400 million or more for claiming that Mar-a-Lago, which he was using as collateral, was worth way more, was not worth nearly as much as he said it was worth. The judge just decided, I think it's only worth $18 million, not the $300 million you said it was worth. And then, again, this is where citizen journalism comes in. On X, I saw somebody they pulled up on Zillow, for crying out loud, the property next door, like a condo next to Mar-a-Lago. Yes. A tiny little parcel itself was worth like $3 million.
Wow.
Mar-a-Lago is like 43 acres or something ridiculous like that. And as the guy commented on Twitter, the furniture in Donald Trump's house is worth more than $18 million, not let alone the land. And so we have our court system is now, it's a persecution system, and it's being used to try to prevent Donald Trump from winning the presidency again. And then we see more deep state actors or the judicial system being abused to try to illegally keep him off the ballot in several states. And again, if all of this effort is being made to keep Donald Trump from being president again, it makes me wonder, like you, why? And I hope, for the sake of the United States, it's because the prospect of his election as president again would be so dangerous to those who are those powerful interests, both in government and out, that's why they don't want him to be president again. Well, that makes me want him to be president so we can see if that's true. And if it's true and he can break up that power center, I think that's good for freedom and for most ordinary Americans.
Wow. Well, I think what you're doing, Jim, is confronting us with the question, what is really all at stake in driving this? I mean, this is like an absurd set of situations, and the law doesn't support this. And I think it does incredible harm to the reputation of the United States as an advanced society when the kind of real estate loan that was talked about is done all the time. And so why would anyone then in their right mind invest in New York State ever again? If you have this risk of politicization, if someone doesn't like you, they're going to go after you. I mean, this is really quite disturbing. So related to this then is also the Biden family, where there's receipt after receipt now that's coming out of the select committees, out of the House, that shows the kind of monies that were involved from foreign actors. I mean, they're all there from Communist Party of China to Ukraine to all kinds of nations. It's just incredible how they used the selling of influence vis-a-vis Joe Biden as a way to make a lot of money. So is that coming into the American consciousness as well in this next election?
I think it is. And it ties into the censorship thing because, of course, the truth was told about the Hunter Biden's laptop, and it was suppressed, even though it was true, because it was dangerous to the regime. But the thing that gets me about it's remarkable how incurious, and it shows how corrupt they are, our so-called corporate or our mainstream media, that is corporate owned and corrupt, that they're not interested in what would be Pulitzer Prize winning pieces, or it would be in a sane world. Instead, they give out Pulitzers for reporting on the fake Russia collusion story for 4 years. That's what you get a Pulitzer for these days.
Right.
But the only thing
we do know now that not only did a number of those outlets get Pulitzer Prizes for investigating the so-called Russian collusion hoax, which was all proved to be incorrect, but that they were also paid. So this is the other side to it. So it's amazing what money does to people's professional obligations.
No, as the most famous Pulitzer Prize winning story once said, follow the money, right? And that's where you're going to get, in fact, and that's getting back to the Bidens. That's what they always seem to do. And the thing that always gets me about the Bidens, especially Hunter Biden, making all of this money, being paid millions of dollars for what? What skills does Hunter Biden actually have? What skills does Jim Biden actually have? Where is their impressive professional resume? The obvious answer is they don't have any. They're certainly not skills that would warrant such exorbitant payments and salaries or whatever you're going to give it. It's basically payoff. Their only marketable skill, if you want to call it that, the only thing they had to market or to sell was their access to Joe Biden. That's it. Zero. That they had nothing else to offer but that. It is so obvious that to say that there's something else going on other than influence peddling is being willfully blind.
Exactly. So we've covered a lot of ground today. And as we kind of get to the home stretch here, Jim, we've talked a lot about the policies, the players, and kind of the incredibly dramatic and sometimes confusing world of U.S. politics, and looking at some of the deeper issues that are at stake here that really relate to really the sovereignty of people and the democratic process of this incredible country called the United States. So in that context, are you seeing signs of green shoots or hope? What are actions that you see that are happening that show that the United States is kind of on a renewal path that we talked about earlier?
Wow, you really put me on the spot, David. Gosh. Signs that the United States is not doomed.
Well, perhaps, Jim, as you think about that, I do have one in mind.
Okay.
One has to do with the initiative related to environmental social governance. And you know this so well, and certainly at Frontier, we've done a lot of research on it and issued a lot of summaries regarding the problems of the so-called woke environmental social governance indexes, where they essentially want to use your money to not only pay you to get you to pay higher fees for investments, but they want to use your money for their woke causes. I mean, it's insane. We know that Larry Fink from BlackRock, among others, Vanguard, have been at the forefront of this stuff. And I also know an organization called the Heartland Institute, Jim, namely yourself and so many others, your incredible team, that have been at the forefront of pushing legislation. I think of Betty Grande as well, pushing legislation to make it illegal to have ESG. And I think you've made incredible progress. In fact, I recall just last month, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal who claimed that ESG is now one of the most hated acronyms on Wall Street. Now, I don't know if that's a head fake, but surely that shows that there's been some progress where you've had some, 26 states now say it's illegal to have ESG funds.
Yep. Okay, you just reminded me of something that makes me happy, David. And congratulations. But you're right. I mean, and not to pour too much cold water on it, but among the team here at Heartland that works on ESG, there is excitement and pleasure to be gained from the fact that victories like this seem so rare. But there's a lot of factors at play. It's like Margaret Thatcher, who said the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of people's money. And while that applies to governments, I think it also kind of applies to the private sector, at least when you're trying to impose socialism through the financial system, try to impose radical green agenda by picking and choosing what you can invest in and trying to use your enormous leverage as a Vanguard or a BlackRock to fundamentally transform, there's that term again, our finance system and the way we invest and the way we organize society. It's turning out that it's not super lucrative and that there's a lot of pushback on it. My only fear is that they will continue their agenda, but just shut up about it. One of the annoying things about the advancements of the left on all fronts over the last several years, but especially during the Biden administration, is that they're not just satisfied with the victory, with the policy victory. They are not truly satisfied until they rub your face in it and just make you regret ever questioning their wisdom and make sure you know your place. And your place is not telling us how to, what you should buy. Our place is to tell you what you should buy and what you should be and how you should be operating your life. So, I do fear a little bit that they'll just continue it quietly in the background. That's still preferable than rubbing our faces in it. And so we will have to see. But, the good news is that actually this was mostly market. The reason why there's been a retreat from ESG, it's not just because of government legislation or state by state legislation, although that is important. It's because there was a pushback and a rejection of it from other investors. And the fact that you just can't make money on it. I mean, it goes back to why all these electric vehicle companies are falling apart. And Ford is pulling back their production, and they're canceling this plant and that battery plant that we're going to do. All that stuff is, has been pulled back because the market eventually does get a say. And they have said that ESG is a loser. And so people are retreating. And so for that, I am grateful.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that is part of the paradox of a lot of this stuff, is that a lot of these crazy policies, I would refer to them as dead end policies, are really not policies. They're irrational ideologies that are imposed on reality.
Yeah.
And over time, the truth will, what does it say, set you free. So when you look at ESG funds, we know that they underperform in pensions. So why would you do that if you're serving the people? So I like the way you're calling it out, Jim. I think the other thing in terms of citizen action, though, is surely people need to speak up, and they need to contact their citizen their representatives, because in the end they are after the voter. And I think as an former elected official, I know that does make a difference. So keep trying. But the other thing is, are you not noticing the emergence of a parallel economy? So, we found out that, so what? Disney makes all kinds of bizarre woke movies for kids and others. The marketplace will speak. So go, buy a different movie that doesn't subscribe to that, and don't go to Disney. Like, your dollar can follow your values. But is that parallel economy emerging in the United States too?
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, Disney is being punished severely for deciding to push an agenda instead of trying to entertain and provide, frankly, family entertainment, wholesome family entertainment, which was the legacy and the purpose. The entire purpose of the Walt Disney Company is that and nothing else. And they moved away from that. And I talk about this a lot with my friends and family, actually, this whole idea of how wokeness and the left have imposed themselves. It's like an all frontal assault. They're everywhere. But especially in our entertainment. And I truly believe that a company like Disney, they get ideologically captured. That's another topic we've talked about on this show. And Disney has been ideologically captured. All of Hollywood has really been ideologically captured. And I believe they had meetings where they would say, it doesn't matter what we give, what messages we have in here. The American people just eat it up. It's Disney. And so it's actually, it's a derelict in our duty to make the world a better place, to not use our power in making the next Marvel superhero movie or the next Disney animated princess movie, and not use it for good. And for good is to push a leftist agenda. And they really believe that the American people are so stupid. They really believe this, that they will just eat it up. Like we're mindless drones, that we just stare at the screen, and whatever the message is, we take it to heart. And then that will be, now that we will be able to create the America we've always wanted through Disney. And that's not how it works. And there may not be a sufficient enough parallel economy as far as animated films are concerned, although I think that's coming. What you end up with is just people will find something else to do. We live in a very technologically advanced age. I watch a ton of YouTube channels, which sounds kind of silly, but you can find a lot of fantastic, entertaining, and smart content on YouTube. And that can take up all of your entertainment time that you give yourself for the day of a couple hours after work when you come home, right? You can watch a couple YouTube channels instead of watching the latest, Disney Marvel build.
Or Jim.
Right.
Or Jim, you could go onto Rumble.
You could go onto
a myriad of other alternative platforms that are not censored.
That is true. You could do that as well. So far, the ones I like, and the Rumble app on my TV doesn't work so great. So anyway, but you can. The point being, you could find your own stuff, but there doesn't even necessarily need to be a big parallel society, market out there for these things. People will just go away. I mean, Disney has not made money on a single movie. They had one blockbuster last year. It's called Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Every single other movie that they produced in that 12-month stretch lost money. Again, like Margaret Thatcher said, eventually you run out of other people's money, and eventually Disney's just going to run out of money. And so they either got to run those leftists out of those positions of power and get back to making family entertainment, or they're not going to be around anymore. It's a pretty tough world.
So doesn't that say a lot? And so people are speaking up, as they did with what was it called again, Budweiser Light, and that fiasco. They're still reeling from that issue in terms of capital losses. So there is reason to be hopeful, but we also need to very much open our eyes while we can open them. And we have an opportunity here with you, Jim, today to get quite a exercise of reality therapy around the complexities of the U.S. election. And I want to thank you so much for all your leadership and work at the Heartland Institute and for spending time with us today.
It was my pleasure, David. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.